Well, I took a major in math, and that's how I know that this is episode 18.
Wasn't last week 18?
Mm,
Maybe.
YouTube.
Uh,
Um,
Off to a great start.
hey, we're off to the same start that we're realistically always off to.
Oh god, that's sad. It's accurate, but it's sad.
No, yeah, this is 18.
This is 18?
Ha! I
Oh,
majored
okay.
in math. I didn't, but
Yeah. Congratulations.
thanks to majoring in math, I can now count to 20.
I could count to 20 before I majored in math.
Well, I never said I got a degree, and I never said I didn't drop out of math majors.
That's fair.
So
Anyways.
this week's episode, we're not going to continue what we were talking about last week on status ailments. That we're saving for its own episode. But for this week, we actually have questions again. So I'll start, and then you, and then me, since we only have three. Okay?
Okay. Sounds good to me.
So my first question, I don't know how much this is going to apply to you,
Hmm.
but I'm going to throw it out there anyway, just in case you have played one that I don't know of.
Okay.
But some games have, rather than a singular mana pool,
Hmm.
spell charges.
Okay.
And one game that did this that's well known is the original Final Fantasy One didn't have mana.
Okay.
Rather, it had 8 levels of spells, and it'd be like you level up your mage, and now your mage gets one more level 1 cast, and then one more level 2 casts. So
Okay.
it's
And
like
you could
you,
just cast a set number of spells per turn? Or
well,
per, like, match?
just in general until you rested it in.
Oh, okay.
So it's like you could cast 9 level 1 spells, 6 level 2 spells, 3 level 3 spells, and 1 level 4 spell. Let's just say,
Okay.
versus having a singular mana pool.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Suikoden is another game series that does it, and it's something that I don't run into regularly at all. But I do
Hmm.
run into it from time to time, and I actually think I'm not going to say I like it better, but there is some merit to it. I think.
Okay.
So I just wanted to get into that. So I don't know. Have you actually played a game that uses spell charges?
Not that I can think of, or at least not in that way.
Well, what would be another way? And like,
I don't know. I'm like trying to think of one with a name, but yeah, there's. I don't know. It's like I feel like I have played some variant of that. But I can't think of one offhand, which I know really doesn't help.
it's fair though. It's really hard to come up with stuff off the top of your head.
Hmm.
All right.
But
Well, I'll go ahead and talk to fill in the
go
gap while you try to remember.
go ahead and start, and we'll figure out what the hell's going on.
So I think for me, what the one benefit, because generally I prefer mantles.
Okay.
I don't really like spell charges because they make the early game kind of suck shit when you can only cast 2 fires and then you're done.
Hmm.
I also think mana is just more versatile
Okay.
because technically you're making the same decision, but you don't feel as claustrophobic about it. Because it's like, okay, let's say you have Cure and Fire are both level 1 spells,
Hmm.
and you can only cast 5 level 1 spells.
Yeah.
Somehow, to me, and this is purely a psychological thing,
Hmm.
to have 5 level 1 casts and have Fire and Cure both be a level 1 cast,
Yeah.
instinctively I will use Fire less in case I need Cure,
In case you need the cure. Yeah, you're
because I can
basically
only have
hoarding.
5 times.
Yeah, you're hoarding your charges like you're hoarding items.
Yeah, but if you make it so that you have 50 mana
Hmm.
and Fire and Cure both cost 10, I might throw out 2 fires before it and save the rest for cures. It's
Okay.
stupid, I know. I agree. It's just a purely psychological thing. I get it,
But it's
but
still
that's
kind of
it
a
is what
thing.
it is.
Yeah.
These are opinions, not facts.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say there is something nice about knowing exactly how many times you can cast a spell, because
Okay.
sometimes I find that actually a game has a lot more mana than it seems like it has,
Okay.
and you can actually get away with casting a fair amount of spells before you run into mana issues.
All
And
right.
again, this is where, like you, I'm having trouble thinking of an example just off the top of
Mhm.
my head. But there
Yeah.
have definitely been games in the past where if I actually stop and break down the mana count, it turns out I could cast spells almost every battle and never really run into a risk of running out.
Okay.
The other upshot, I think, to spell charges is with mana, because it's all one resource, you're
Yeah.
still not as likely to cast. Let's say you get into a battle and you want to clear out, and this applies mostly to basic Jerpagus combat systems that don't have anything super complex going on. There's
Okay.
more going on, obviously, that changes the whole dynamic with
Yeah.
spell charges. So this is purely comparing something like Golden Sun or Final Fantasy, where there's not a whole lot of mechanical depth to the combat.
Okay.
It can be nice to have 9 level 1 shitty fire spells that you can throw out on your basic bitch battles and still have your level 4 spells for a boss.
Okay.
So it feels like in the mid and end game, there's more incentive to use those low level charges
Because it's not
because,
taking away your capability to use the higher spells like mana does.
yeah, whereas with mana, using your low level charges, since it all pulls from the same pool, means that by the time you reach the boss, you may not be able to use.
Anything.
Yeah, and thereby it results, and again, this is purely psychological, I understand,
Mhm.
in the conservation of mana in a worst case scenario.
Okay.
For a worst case scenario, I should say.
Uh, Okay.
So I mean, I just prefer mana, but I think I would like to see something tried with spell charges that maybe brings more into it in
I think
terms of
what?
just making it kind of a risk reward thing.
So I think spell charges has more potential to be interesting, but because of that, it also has that much higher risk of just flopping and being awful. Whereas with the standard mana system, you know what you have, you know what you're gonna get. There's nothing to experiment, but it's hard to fuck up.
Yeah,
And because of that, spell charges could be better if done right, but I feel like getting that done right would be difficult.
I mean, I almost feel like if you're going to have one of those games where your mana resets at the end of every battle or something,
Yeah, then make
spell
something fun of it.
well, spell charges could almost be more interesting then because now rather than it
Now
kind of it kind of
you have a
liberates
reason
you.
not. Yeah,
I mean, what if like you just had a universal spell, like every spell was free to cast, but
but
you
you
could
can
only
only cast.
cast so many spells per battle. But at the end of battle, you got all your spells back, all your charges back.
Mm,
Then all of a sudden, there's like this risk reward thing where in your standard battles you can be more aggressive because it's only a standard battle,
yeah.
and then in your boss battles you have to think more about, do I want to risk going aggressive and running out of my charges early on?
See, the only problem I see with that is that there's very little incentive to go back and use your weaker spells. Like, once you get your really good spell that costs one charge, or your basic bitch fireball that also costs one charge, there's never any reason to go use your basic spell again.
Which is true, but let's be real. Do you ever use your basic bitch spell anyway in Jerpagas?
I mean, if I need to, or if it's like, yes, sometimes. Like, if a boss or an enemy has low health and wasting 300 mana would be extreme overkill when I could use 30 mana and still kill it. Not often, not when I like need to do damage,
That's
but
almost
yes,
always when you can just flip to a physical, though.
yeah, but still, my
I see your point. I'm just saying I think that that doesn't really happen in Jerpogas today. And I
mm,
definitely think that if you could make a system where you had reason to use old and new,
yeah,
it could be interesting, but I think that's a separate issue from spell charges themselves.
it could be.
Mostly because, like I said, in most games today, it's like, oh, you got the second level fire spell, and now you will almost never use the first level one again.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea of that happening and then you can use 3 level 1s but only 1 level 2, I could see that working to still incentivize you to use those weaker spells even after you've unlocked better ones.
But if it recharges after every battle, then it would
Then you kind of
ultimately,
lose some of that.
yeah. Because I think one of like mana is such a weird thing in the sense that when you're too restrictive with it, magic it's like the really good guns in a shooter. People tend to, and it's like your really good items, conserve
Mhm.
it for when it's necessary
Yeah.
in case you find yourself in a bad situation. But the end result is that
Is that
sometimes combat, nice combat can get too stale because you're not using your
using all
magic.
these things?
But on the flip side, if it's always free, then you get a situation where, like, I feel like with Final Fantasy 13, there's almost no difference between magic and physical at all,
Yeah.
other than which stat it pulls from.
Which stat it uses?
They don't really feel fundamentally different in any way.
Okay.
Also, that there is, I do kind of enjoy some of that resource management aspect to it in a game
Mhm.
like Persona, where resource management is so heavy, and it's you're not just managing your mana in the dungeon, but you're also managing your time in the larger context of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more an outlier, but it's like some of the earlier Dragon Quests where part of the fun of the game and is going from barely being able to cast two fireballs to being able to go through a whole dungeon and not be completely out of mana and wrecked by the end of it because you gradually grow that mana pool.
Yeah.
So there's an argument for and against mana,
Yeah.
and I feel like spell charges could potentially provide a way to reach a good middle ground.
If
In a good game. I'm
okay.
not saying I want everything to be spell charges. Just I think that there's something interesting there that
It's something
hasn't,
worth exploring.
yeah, that hasn't been explored to its full potential.
Yeah, no, like I said, the idea just hell, even being something unique would be cool to see, but it would just have to be done right to be worth, continuing to do.
Yeah. Okay. I, I'm guessing you didn't come up with your game.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Well, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So what's your
Yeah.
question?
All right, my question, since we are the Trails and Persona fucking podcast,
Mm-hmm.
is directly about those, and particularly the social link system. And my question is, do you prefer those social links to have some kind of secondary effect, such as combat bonuses or discounts in stores or whatever extra effect? Or is the social link system more a narrative tool and something like that, where it's not an actual physical change in the game? I don't want to say parameters, but like how it functions.
I I think
So basically, like the Persona 3 versus Persona 5 approach to the social links.
yeah, and honestly, I love the way. All right, let me just say one hard negative.
Okay.
One hard negative is don't do what Persona 4 Golden did and have some social links impact the combat and others don't,
Yes.
because there's no reason in Persona 4 Golden to prioritize non-party members,
Agreed.
because party members, the benefits for doing their social links are very tangible in combat.
Yes.
So all of a
So you
sudden, instantly, your party members become more prioritized.
agree.
But otherwise, I think I'm like 90% on the Persona 5 side of things, where I much prefer them to have an impact on gameplay.
Okay.
Because to me, that just makes it more interesting and it ties the two halves of the game. Because honestly, my biggest problem with Persona, and this is really almost any of the games that have tried to merge these visual novels and gameplay elements,
Okay.
is that I don't feel like they have enough impact on one another.
Okay.
Especially in 3, basically the two halves of the game take place completely apart.
Yeah.
You have your daytime social and your nighttime dungeon crawling, and outside of Persona Fusion, nothing else. They don't connect at all.
Okay.
And I don't think that's really making the best use
Of
of
the
the
system.
gimmick, you know,
Okay.
of that idea. I mean, if you're going to have these two halves, then the best thing you can do is have them complement and reflect each other in a
Okay.
way that they otherwise wouldn't. And I think that's why Persona in particular works so well. Is, if you took the dating sim daytime elements away, up until 5, you're really just left with a rudimentary dungeon crawler.
Yeah.
But if you take the dungeon crawling aspects out, you're just left with kind of a whatever visual novel.
Okay.
But when you put the two together, the way they balance, just when you're getting bored with the daytime stuff, you go into a dungeon. Just when you've
Mm.
had about enough of the dungeon crawling, you can go do the daytime stuff.
Yeah.
It's like there's never too much of one thing.
Okay.
And I think the more you can merge those together, the more it makes you think about the other half when you're doing one, and
Okay.
the more that makes this synergy work.
Okay.
And the better that whole cycle of constantly keeping you refreshed by constantly changing the gameplay,
Yeah.
it drives to that idea.
All right.
Because basically, you're always, one of the things that Jerpica, or not Jerpicas, but RPGs in general do is
Yeah.
those short-term goals
Yeah.
that you set for yourself and you accomplish. Well, this way it adds more goals into that cycle, because it's like, okay, now I'm at the daytime cycle. Who do I want to spend my time with? Well, it's not just about who do I want to spend my time with in terms of who do I like or who do I not like.
Yeah.
It's what benefit do I want at the nighttime thing, or for my
Okay.
dungeon crawling. And this is
Yeah.
where that other 10% kind of comes in, because the
Okay.
only problem I have is that if the characters are bad, it can force you to put up with bad characters
Yeah.
because they give you good rewards.
Yeah.
So in essence, you're not actually getting the role playing, which I don't really do that anyway for my
Mhm.
games. But if you're one of
Okay.
those people who actually likes to role play,
Mhm.
then you're no longer really able to do that, because there's more to think about than just who do I like, or who would my character hang out with, or who would I hang out with.
Yeah. At that point, you're choosing based solely on stats and the incentives instead of the characters themselves.
Well, I wouldn't say solely, but it's definitely a factor.
See, and that, I mean,
And that's where I understand that argument and I
mhm.
sympathize with it,
Yeah.
but I think there are a few reasons why I just disagree with it on a personal level.
Okay.
First of all, I think one of the problems is that you get to socialize with so many people anyway, like especially
Mhm.
in 5, that
Okay.
really it just comes down to who you're going to pick first.
Okay.
And the problem is, okay, so let's say you make it so that you don't have enough time to socialize with everybody, or you do what Trails did and
Only
li-
let you do, yeah.
limit it by so. The problem with that, and this is something that I really noticed in Trails,
Okay.
is that not having all the friendship points
Yeah.
really does a disservice to the character interactions and balance.
Okay.
To where the characters that you're spending your bonding points on,
Yeah.
you obviously feel a lot more connected to, which helps in that role playing aspect.
Hmm.
But the problem is, I know nothing about Elliot, and I don't feel any incentive to know anything about Elliot because I'm not going to lie, I forget Elliot exists half the time
Yeah.
because the game leaves so a lot to these character moments,
Yeah.
which it should do in a sense. But the problem is the characters are kind of lacking outside of that in terms of any kind of agency. So the end result is that it's better for role playing, but as just somebody who wants to enjoy the game,
But not mechanically.
well, as somebody who just wants to enjoy the game, I feel like a lot of the characters in the cast are just like who?
Yeah.
Like, unless you go out of your way to put them in your party, you will never know a whole lot about Milliam or Machias or Eustace.
Yeah.
And because I never use these characters, like Eustace is one that's tragic because I never done anything with him.
Yeah.
And then this last playthrough, I've decided to use him, and it's like, oh, okay. I appreciate his inner turmoil a lot more, especially in two,
Yeah.
that you don't really get to see in the main game, and he feels more like a character. And when he acts more in cutscenes in like the main game,
Okay.
I feel more for him. But the problem is, it's like, but I feel nothing for these other characters, or not nothing, but not as much.
Not as much. Okay.
And it's not just not as much. Again, we're talking about in degrees here, okay?
All right.
It's not that I dislike them. It's not that I feel nothing towards them. It's like I like Machias, but I like Machias more in like that goofy NPC way. He
Okay.
doesn't feel like a member of the party.
Yeah.
And that's where with Persona's methods, at least you get a good understanding of every social link in one playthrough because you have so many, so much time that you can really get a good feel for all the characters, even if you don't necessarily max all of them. So
Okay.
it's really, do you want to sacrifice that role playing? You only really get to know the characters that you spend a lot of time with, or
Mhm.
do you want to have a sort of balanced cast where everybody feels like they have a lot going on? Because I don't think I would have as many complaints with the Cold Steel one
Yeah.
if the individual characters had more going on outside of just their bonding points or their specific, like in the first game, their chapters.
Their chapters. Okay.
Because it feels like it's either laser focused in on them or they barely exist.
No, that makes sense.
And getting back to the whole your original question, that's where I understand the role playing aspect,
Yeah.
but for me, for those reasons I just stating, the role playing aspect doesn't weigh as heavily.
Okay.
Therefore, I prefer the synergy and having your social links tie into the gameplay.
All right. I mean, I understand, especially from a mechanical point. I disagree, but that might be because I do like to, play the role a little bit more. I like to spend time with the characters that I like because they're characters I like, not because of what benefits I feel they give me.
Well, and I should throw in there, just really quickly,
Mm,
a character you dislike can become a character you like if you spend time with them.
yeah.
But if you limit my ability to spend time with people, then I might never get the chance to see that other side. Like
Hmm.
Eustace, I've always felt indifferent towards, but now that I'm doing his thing and I get to know a little bit more about him, I like him a little more. quite
Yeah.
a bit more actually. He's no longer he doesn't feel like NPC number who gives a shit.
Mhm.
Like and
And I mean, and that's an issue with the way that the Trails games limits their, their bonding points and who you can spend your time with. I don't feel that's as much an issue of you get a combat bonus because your rank with them is high. I feel like that's a, you know, ponding distribution issue.
oh yeah, that's I just wanted to throw that in
And
not to
and no, and that is an issue. I completely agree, but that's not a you get a combat bonus issue, or at least not as much.
yeah, no, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you there.
Mm. And for that social side of the game, I like that to be motivated by social opinions or social thoughts and not rigid, what do I get from this kind of thoughts. I like the real life half of the game to be more, I'm spending time with this person because I like them more ideally, like real life instead of I'm spending time with this person because of what I get.
Well, the problem is we're apparently both decent people because in real life people do tend to spend time with people based on what they get. It's called networking and it's a big deal in the business world.
Yeah, and
We're just completely inept at it. We're those little douchebags who actually just want to hang around with people we like, and that's
yeah,
why we make no money and we do stupid podcasts at 11 p.m.
basically. But yeah, I want my game to reflect that side of my friends or people that I like. I spend time with characters that I like, and not just because of whatever arbitrary gamey bonus I get from them. Like you said, from a mechanical point, I understand the bonus, and maybe if there was some way to, I don't know, even out the bonuses so it's not one bonus is way better than the other or whatever, maybe you could tie them together some way. But in Persona 5 especially, I found myself spending time with characters solely because their bonus was really good and not even because I cared about them in any way, which was never really an issue I had in Persona 3 and not as much in 4 aside from the party members. I just got to spend time with characters that I liked, and that made me happy as, someone role playing, as awful as it fucking I hate the term. But it made me feel like I was choosing my characters and my time because of how I wanted to spend it, not, for gamey reasons.
And that's fair. And the only counter to that is I would say it, in a way, it more reflects real life because, like I said, sometimes you hang out with people that you don't like because
Because
it
of
comes with benefits.
yeah, and
Sometimes you put up with people's stupid bullshit because you want that promotion.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't do that enough, and that's why I don't make enough money.
Well, I'm just saying, in terms of specifically the argument about reflecting real life, just that specific part.
Yeah.
Because I understand what you're saying. It's a game. You want to spend the time with the people you want to spend time with, not necessarily the people who give you the best benefit. I
Well,
understand the argument.
no, I mean, you're kind of right, but you're kind of the exact opposites. My point is when I'm role playing, it's not a game anymore. I'm that guy doing what that guy would do, and that guy is not going to choose because of some gamey things that are very gamey that the character doesn't know about because it's gamey. He just picks people because of people. And I want the game world to reflect that and my choices as a player to reflect that and not be influenced by gamey factors.
I mean,
You know what I
I
mean?
guess, but then conceivably the whole concept of social links is very gamey. But
Yes.
that's
It's like having arbitrary numbers linked to it.
this is
Yes.
getting this can go down a really stupid rabbit hole that I don't want to get into because I don't give a shit about role playing.
Yeah.
It's like the phrase role playing game. Where do you want to define a role playing game? And I don't care anymore. I
Mm.
don't fucking care.
No, I get that.
So like I get your argument, and I certainly understand for people who do feel that way. I just don't
Mm.
feel that way. I,
No,
I prefer I prefer the mechanical benefit and just think it's a
it's
more
the
interesting system.
it's the mechanical side versus the, I don't want to say emotional side, but basically
The role playing side.
the role. Yeah, that's a better term. The mechanical and the role playing. Which side do you prefer? And I
Uh,
think we just clearly pick different sides.
surprising no one.
No, not at all.
Surprising no one who isn't us, or rather the other way around.
No one who is us. Yeah,
Yeah. Anyway,
but all right.
do you have anything else on that, or are we moving on to my last question?
Well, let's move on to your last one.
Okay, so there's so many different types of villains,
Hmm.
but let's that we can try to pick apart. So let's just pick two of the big sort of things and discuss them.
Okay.
And that's sympathetic villains versus unsympathetic villains. Which do you prefer and why? Or
Okay.
rather, let's just discuss it. Fuck it, because I think
Okay.
it's just going to come down to it depends.
Hmm.
So,
So starting off with the it depends. Um,
because I think there's room for both,
well,
obviously.
it's interesting because I realize in most forms of media, I prefer the sympathetic villain. I feel like it creates a better emotional bond between the viewer and the villain instead of just the big bad. There's suddenly more of a character, there's more depth and development usually. There's more conflict between the hero and the villain because you can relate with the villain, so it's not just a clear good and bad. Generally, I find that more dynamic and interesting. However, in games when suddenly you're not watching but you are the hero, I kind of like it the other way where it's this unsympathetic, just evil piece of shit. So I can feel super satisfied just beating the shit out of this evil piece of garbage. And it's not I'm conflicted because he's a good guy and I'm a good guy and yeah, and I win, but I feel bad because I kind of liked him. In the games, I like that satisfaction of just kicking evil's ass. And that's why I think in games I generally do prefer just a straight unsympathetic evil, whereas in movies and books and whatever, it can be a bit more even. Know what I mean?
Hmm. I mean, I don't. I have a different take on it, but yes, I see what you're saying.
Okay. All right.
Um, for me, a lot of it obviously depends on the type of story you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
I don't particularly think there's anything to be gained from making fucking Bowser and Mario a sympathetic villain. Who
No.
cares?
Yeah.
You take Princess, you go get Princess. We're
Yeah.
talking about RPGs. RPGs tend to have a bit more narrative depth, and again,
Hmm.
because we're the Persona Trails podcast, what
Yeah.
really brought this question up was a lot of people complaining when Persona 5 came out about the villains being very villainous and not particularly sympathetic, like they were caricatures.
Okay.
And I'm convinced that that was on purpose because the whole point is that the shadow is the part of yourself that you reject.
Okay.
And for the most part, all you really see are people's shadows. So
Okay.
literally the parts of themselves that they're rejecting, which manifest as very cartoonish and villainous because they're not representative of a whole person.
They're just representative of the worst aspects of that person.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I also definitely agree that Maruki is the best villain in the whole game because you get to spend the whole game understanding and learning his multiple sides. And it definitely makes for a much more emotional connection to that character. I don't want to say finale because there's a lot more that goes into a finale than just the connection between two characters.
Okay.
And I think it kind of botched everything or they tacked on a finale after the finale. What do you want? It's gonna be problematic.
Yeah.
But the point is, there's that connection there.
I mean,
Like a lot of people love like the Kamoshida arc the most, the first one with the gym teacher,
okay.
and I don't think uncoincidentally that's when you get to see the most of his person,
Okay.
not just his shadow.
Okay.
But at the same time, personally, I also didn't mind them just being villains because
Yeah.
I think that there's a tendency, there's lazy writing, and
Hmm.
then there's acknowledging that some people in the world are assholes.
Yeah.
And you can sympathize with how they became assholes, but it doesn't change the fact that they're fucking dicks.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
some people are really
Shitty.
only there are some people in the world who are just very, very difficult to sympathize with. People
Yes.
who are born with an immense amount of wealth
Shittiness.
and never had to work for anything in their life and basically became entitled and became assholes
Okay.
because of that. Like they just led a pampered life. And you could
Okay.
say technically they're sympathetic because they don't know any better and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I get it, but sometimes they're just fucking assholes too.
Yeah.
It's like not everybody who's a bully gets bullied at home. That may
Mm.
be the more dynamic character. That may be what happens in real life. That may be if you're trying to make a point, the route you go. But the
Okay.
problem is that not everything has to be making a point,
Yeah.
and not everything. And when all you do is reflect one of the more complex aspects of real life, you're still not necessarily giving an accurate portrayal of real life or the dangers of it
Okay.
when all you have is rampant sympathy. It's like it's one of the problems I have with not killing is not that I want to just kill everybody. It's just that
Sometimes it's not realistic to not kill anybody in this giant war or whatever.
yeah, to believe that somebody who perpetrated a war which resulted in the death of millions of people
It's just gonna get knocked out and be fine, and nothing's gonna, and that's enough.
is going to be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
What? And I I don't agree with that. And there's a lot of complexity there. And my point is, yes, it's true that in real life there are a lot of villains that are a lot more complex than just, hey, look, he's an asshole.
Just yeah.
But there are also people who are just assholes.
But there are those people that are just bad.
And sometimes you need a villain who's just bad to allow you to explore other, either just have fun with it,
Yeah.
because like I said, not everything needs to be some major treatise on life.
Yeah.
But sometimes also having just a villain that is bad can allow you to explore more dynamicism in terms of what good might be.
Good is.
Like I said, if you have somebody who is a tyrant and an
Mm.
unabashed asshole, do you kill them outright or do you take them to trial?
Yeah.
That's sort of like vigilantism, Darwinistic. Do you kill them for that or do you go through the system?
Okay.
If they're just an unrepentant asshole, does that make it okay to just kill them?
To just end it.
Or do they still deserve justice the same as everyone else? And that's a story that I think would be better explored if you wanted to focus on that side of it
Okay.
with just an asshole villain. I mean, again, this is less RPGs, more real life, but just to give a real life example, you know, like let's say somebody murders another family's daughter
Okay.
and the family wants them to have the death sentence,
Yeah.
but the man is who killed their daughter is only 20 years old.
Okay.
How much more of his life is there that he could potentially change and repent and reform?
Okay.
And that, in terms of story and what a story is trying to do, because the problem with making too many points is you tend to dilute the significance of your points when you're
None of them
trying to
matter.
make too many in one book or one game or one work of art.
You do.
uh, if you write a 1,000 page book that covers 70 different
Huh.
points, it's not going to be as impactful as a 100-page book that explores one point really,
I,
really, really well.
okay. I mean, you muted yourself for like 30 seconds there, so I have no idea what you said.
Okay, I didn't
But
cut out at all. That's on your end, unfortunately, because I'm watching the little volume bars on the recording software. So,
okay.
backing up, um, the point is when you make too many points, it dilutes the significance of each point.
Yeah.
Of each point. So if you wanted to explore something about like justice and the death penalty versus reformation in the prison system,
You focus on that instead of trying to include everything else.
yeah, having the murderer of this person's daughter be just an outright dickhead
Hmm.
can help you focus on that part of the story.
Okay.
And I think that's where something like, let's say, Persona 5, where the villains are all assholes.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're kind of Saturday morning cartoon villains, but the point of the story is not so much understanding why people,
Are bad like they are?
yeah, are bad like they are. It's more people are bad. How can we fight against it?
Okay.
And do I agree that understanding and giving more depth and complexity to the characters would have made for a more complex reflection, more complex and more accurate reflection of real life? Sure,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
probably.
but it also would have then become a very different game, one that
Yeah.
again is more philosophical, more mature, more whatever. I wouldn't have a problem with it, but that's not
Hmm.
necessarily what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And therefore, while it's a valid criticism in terms of you not liking it, saying the game is bad for lacking it is something I disagree with.
Okay.
Which I guess is just sort of my point with this whole question is I think the unsympathetic villain has a place even in this era of moral complexity.
I mean, yeah, not everything has to be this deep, serious, you know, look at morality and philosophy and whatever. Sometimes it can just be, you know, a hero and a villain. And I think there's a place for that.
Yeah,
And pretending that there's not just kind of defeats the other, the point of the other side that,
yeah, I feel like ultimately in all my rambling, I made two distinct points. Because
yeah.
the first is kind of what you just said. There's nothing wrong with the simple story of good versus evil.
Hmm.
We all love it. Lord of the Rings has lasted this long for a reason.
Yeah.
Second, sometimes focusing your story more on one side of the equation requires giving up that complexity elsewhere, but that's not inherently a bad thing. It
Okay.
allows your story to be more focused on
Okay.
whatever theme specifically you're trying to present.
Okay.
So I just think that there's grounds for it. What really bugs me the most
What?
is when they don't commit to one or the other.
It's somewhere in the middle.
I hate it when, let's say, you have a sympathetic villain who, at the end, for no reason, just goes full asshole, like inexplicably goes full asshole, because we need a
Okay.
final boss fight.
Yeah.
And I particularly hate it when you have an unsympathetic villain who, after you fight them in their dying cutscene, all of a sudden it tries to make you sympathize with.
Yeah. That shit's fucking annoying.
Commit to one or the other. That's all I'm saying. That's not all I'm saying, but
But you're saying a lot of things. But
yeah. In terms of which one is better, which one is worse, they both have their place. But for
it
fuck's sake, commit all one way or the other way.
yeah, it depends what you're making. If your point is to make this serious philosophy on whatever, usually the sympathetic villain gives you more insight into the villain, I guess. Whereas if you're trying to make something more simple and gamey and maybe feel goody, I guess, that unsympathetic, just asshole villain, I think, fits that role better. To just be gamey and, I don't know,
Well,
heroic-y.
and you brought up a point in your opening thing
Hmm.
that's very true, and that's that games are a fundamentally different form of media because you're controlling it.
Yeah.
And that there are some games that try to put you into a role of a more sympathetic villain, but they never
Okay.
really go too far with it.
Yeah.
And I think it could be interesting to have a game that makes you do some really things that you wouldn't be comfortable doing. And I'm not
Okay.
saying like some big shock value thing, like it forces you to rape somebody.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you're playing as a rapist.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it has to be that bad because then you're detracting the point by shock value.
Yeah.
Last of Us 2. But to be able to play with that idea that you are somebody who maybe doesn't reflect, or you're playing somebody who maybe doesn't reflect who you are, could be very impactful. And in a way, do you just have an inherent degree of sympathy because this person is your avatar in the world,
Hmm.
even if you don't agree with them?
Yeah, I mean, fucking shit, why can't I remember what it's called? Spec Ops: The Line, I feel like tried to play with that a little bit. Not as much as they could have, but it definitely played into that and worked better because of it.
Yeah, there are a few things that do it, but in weird ways. Like, because this was something I was thinking about playing Blood.
Okay.
Because in Blood, you play an unrepentant asshole. I mean,
Okay.
you're like I can't think of the word right now, a member of a cult to a dark god,
Okay.
and the dark god betrays you and kills you, and then
Okay.
basically through the power of sheer hatred alone, you come back to life and murder everyone with the dark god.
Okay.
And they're like these innocent characters that run around and you can just kill them for health or whatnot. Like your character's not a good guy,
Okay.
but it's just an explodey, shooty, whatever game. It's
Yeah.
not obviously trying to do anything complicated.
Hmm.
And then you have games like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which stirred
Yeah.
up some fucking controversy for the no Russian mission,
Yeah.
which was an interesting idea and could have actually sparked some real discussion if it wasn't Call of Duty and the rest of the game wasn't just a war hero movie. You get my point. Like
I
that
do.
in terms of actually making the player do stuff that they don't want to do,
It can
they're
work. It can make it interesting because you're suddenly not the great hero that you thought you were or that you think you are. Your character's not.
yeah, or even that you expect just by
Yeah.
virtue of being the character that you control.
Hmm.
You want to play the good guy, but what if you're not? What if you're playing against the bad guy? And in terms of the sympathetic versus unsympathetic, I mean, again, there's even just within this, you could go both ways. You can make a character who is a complete douchebag,
Yeah.
and then do you sympathize with him because he's your avatar, or is he just an irredeemable shitlord and you're rooting for the hero?
Yeah.
Or do you make a villain who is ultimately the villain of the story, but who's so sympathetic that even though the story has to end with his death and the hero winning, you still can't help.
But want him to like survive or something.
Yeah, it's like I want you to live, but for you to live would be an absolutely horrible thing.
Yeah.
So, and with RPGs and their increased emphasis on storytelling, I feel like that latter one in particular
Yeah.
could be. There's a lot of grounds there for something like that.
Okay.
Like you're playing the demon lord, but it
But he's
really
the
builds up why he's the demon lord and why he believes what he does, and it's not necessarily wrong. It's just not right either.
okay.
It's basically rather than because this happens in games a lot. Like, oh, the villain is somebody who is a good person, but they're so tormented.
That they like became evil or something.
Yeah, that now they just want to blow up the world because they're so nihilistic and they don't care.
Yeah.
Rather than telling the story of the hero who does that, tell us that story.
Be the villain and
Be
see him get twisted over time.
Yeah, be the person who is just trying to live a happy life and then everybody dies and who goes through this journey to destroy the world, but the whole way is just struggling between what he knows is, you know, I can't, what he knows is
Right.
wrong versus what,
Needs to be done.
yeah, he feels needs to be done.
Okay.
I think that would be a fascinating story.
It would be if you could find a way to force the player to do these bad things without them feeling like they're being forced,
Yeah, and I think,
which is going to be hard because given that situation, I feel like the player's always going to try and do the right thing and overcome the harder challenge because it's the right thing, and then that kills your point.
well, you
Or
just don't get that option. It's an RPG, it's linear.
it's like, or you're going to be just narratively forced to do the bad thing, and you lose that conflict of,
But I
I
think if the character's internally conflicted, it can help
it could
offset
help.
that. But rather than get off on this dumb fantasy idea, you get my point though. Like I think there's a lot of grounds to work within this field that hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah.
Both in this one and in terms of the whole sympathetic versus unsympathetic. There's room
Mhm.
for both. Just because we're in a world of moral complexity and gray, everything being gray,
Doesn't
has
mean that
hasn't been
everything
the fucking fad for the past like 5 to 10 years.
it doesn't mean that everything has to be that way.
Yeah, there's room for multiple types of stories, people.
I mean, Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest, whatever, doesn't do that at all. It's straight up good and evil, and it's survived and flourished in part because of that.
Yep. So
So,
that just because something isn't as morally complex in one way doesn't mean it doesn't present other kind of ethical and moral complexities elsewhere in its story.
okay,
And in fact, sometimes having a villain who is, I mean, okay, let's go back to Lord of the Rings.
okay,
Thematically, the Lord of the Rings explores a lot of things without having villains who are sympathetic.
yeah,
He explores the importance of friendship and warfare and the effects of warfare. All these very heavy themes,
okay,
industry and warfare and its impact on the environment. Literally, the industry of war
yeah,
is the whole thing with Saruman.
okay.
It explores all these things, and yet Saruman is not this super deep, complicated character. He's just a dude who was corrupted by his lust for power.
Yeah,
Sauron's just an asshole,
he's just evil, and that's all there really is to it.
and it tells its story in 3 books, and it
Yeah,
made its points, and it made them well. And I don't think that A Song of Ice and Fire is somehow the superior fantasy series just because it has tits and blood and everything is morally gray.
yeah. No, that makes sense.
They both have their place. They're both trying to do different things, and they're
Yeah,
both doing
it's
them in different ways.
mhm. One of them is a much more straightforward good versus evil, but explores other things using it, and the other one focuses on the ambiguity of everything.
Yeah. So I think that sums up the argument. I think we're kind of just saying the same thing over and over at this point, or at least I am,
A little bit.
which means I have nothing to say further on it. So, do you?
I think we're good.
Well, that about sums up this episode, Ben, unless you have anything you'd like to add at the end of it.
I don't know. I finished Cold Steel 2 today. That was fun.
Alrighty, now you're moving on to 3. I haven't been able to play Cold Steel for weeks.
I kicked the final boss's ass and fucking with just 6 S arts
I'm
or S
really,
crafts.
I'm really, really not surprised. The game is really easy,
Yeah,
stunningly.
it's supposedly it's like the easiest in the series, but
I don't know what the artist is.
I don't know.
Anyway,
But anyways, I beat
uh,
that. It was fun. It was satisfying.
that's good. I don't really have anything Jerpico related because I've been listening to music all week. So I guess that's where we're gonna end off.
Alrighty. Well,
Bye bye.
laters.